Welcome. I'm Anthony So, Director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Livable Future, and thank you all for attending the premiere of Food Frontier. It's the second documentary we produced here at CLF.
So now I'll introduce these folks, even though you kind of know a little bit about them now. But from your left to right, Rodney Taylor, who has relocated since the film. He's now in Northern Virginia, which is why we are graced with his presence. I'm sure he would have flown from Southern California to be with us, but instead he just had to drive from Northern Virginia. Allison Carpin, who was formerly at the Food Trust in Philadelphia, and that's the story she told was when she was there, but now she's a food system researcher at University of Delaware. I have that right? Okay. And that's shorthand for it, right? You can tell more about it. And Maritza Owens from Harvest Home in New York City, developer of farmers markets. And Mike Milley, my partner on the film. I feel like we tried to tell a lot of stories here, and you only get a piece of them, obviously. So this is kind of a rare opportunity to keep the conversation going. I kind of see any of these kind of documentary films as conversation starters. So if you have any pressing questions for our panel here, this is the time to ask it. And Chris Stevens will be running a microphone that now works, I'm sure. And but I wanted to just ask our panelists a few questions first. Because Rodney, I was very curious when I saw that you had moved to Virginia. I know that you're a person who likes a challenge, because Rodney mentioned that he started a farm to school project in Santa Monica, Malibu School District, and then people said to him, "Well, that's great what you've done, Rodney, but you can't do this in a more low-income school district." So he took a job in Riverside and proved people wrong in that sense. And then I think that the move to Virginia was to prove another point. But do you want to talk about that?
So Santa Monica, Malibu was a small, affluent district of 15 schools and 15,000 students, and we bought from the local farmers market. And they said, "Oh, that's great, but that's the Republic of Santa Monica. It's still fluent. It's not replicable." And so 10 years after starting the program in Santa Monica, I took the job at Riverside, which was 3 times the size and far more needy. 31 elementary schools, in 5 years we had it fully institutionalized, where we started out, as I said in the documentary, we spent $10,000 the first year. We had spent $450,000 by my final year. And then people said, "Well, that's great," but they still, people were still telling me 17 years after I began the first salad bar that of its kind, that it still couldn't be done. So Fairfax, Virginia created the great opportunity. It's the 10th largest school district in the country with 184,000 students in 195 schools. We have 141 elementary schools. We'll begin the salad bar in the first one on May 26th, and 5 years from then we'll have completed all 141 schools. So we will. So it's important we provide access to children who may not have it, that we teach all children. So our goal is to take the 5-year-old and teach them by the time they leave our school system to be lifelong healthy eaters. And our work has shown that you can transform school food and you can serve as a catalyst for change in the community.
Also, I wanted to ask Allison, you do a lot of research that looks at what happens when you put supermarkets in and how it changes or doesn't change people's eating habits. Do you mind saying a little bit about that? Is that okay? I didn't warn you I was going to ask you that, so.
Yeah, my work is pretty broad. You can imagine I was at the Food Trust for 11 years, almost 12. We started as 6 people when I began, and I think when I left there was like 120 something employees. So you can imagine how much growth and how many different facets of my research I ended up sort of exploring. So, corner stores, farmers markets, supermarkets, school food, nutrition education, SNAP Ed. It goes on and on, I think. It's a good thing I got a good ADD personality in me. But yeah, I think this is an interesting question, the supermarket question. Anybody who is familiar with the research knows that there's been a lot of controversy really around whether or not putting a supermarket in a community makes a difference or not. And I think, I have a lot of opinions on this, but I think there's a lot of different meanings to making a difference. And we've been tracking BMI, body mass index. One of the largest studies looked at it through telephone surveys. Only a few years ago, and I think, there's now I have an R01 looking at the impact of a supermarket in low-income neighborhood in Philadelphia, and it certainly isn't easy to get the people who you want to most influence to answer a very long, painful survey many times over to see whether or not it's really making a difference. So on the flip side is, we have lots of images and stories of people whose lives have been changed, and there's sort of this nice framework that I fall back on, which is, well, if we don't have supermarkets, we don't have places to buy things, then where are we? Because we can't even start if you can't go anywhere if we don't have that to start with. So yeah, I think there's probably always going to be controversy around it, but at the end of the day, I think there's no silver bullet, and we can't do much if we don't start somewhere.
Great, thanks. Maritza, I just want to ask, there were some topics that came up in our discussion that didn't make it into the film. Some of it is around the barriers to starting the markets, and I know you talked about the fact that there's now a lot of competition in that space, kind of people wanting to start farmers markets. Can you say a little bit about what happens with when you're trying to develop markets and now you're up against competing with other people who are also starting markets, and maybe they don't always have the same goals in mind that you have? Can you say something about that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is obviously, healthy eating is at the top of the list for everyone. And the proliferation of farmers markets has increased significantly. The challenge is that only 2% of our population grows food. So we're, in New York City alone, for example, there are 140 farmers markets, where only 2% of the population, the farmers that are in the system are the same farmers doing farmers markets. There aren't any new farmers coming into the system. And it's almost, for some people, when we started doing this, we started to provide access to healthy food. It's become a fashion now. People want it because we're doing a building, and we see it as a marketing tool to be able to tell our tenants that we have a farmers market close by. I'm a nonprofit. There's money coming down the pike for farmers market, so I want to get into the healthy food movement. So let's start a farmers market. So there are all sorts of reasons why people are now want to do a farmers market, which kind of makes it bad for those of us who have been doing it, because if a market gets started and it doesn't succeed, then it makes it that much more difficult to be able to recruit farmers, because then they don't want to come because they're seeing themselves as wasting time and resources and energy into a project that's not going to succeed. So now we're trying to navigate the system. We get at least 10 requests every year to do new markets. And so we have to be very selective now and really go and really talk to the partners, because a lot of the times we're able to do the farmers market, but we really need to work with the organizations in the community on the ground to help to promote the markets, because we can't do it all. So if you are not aligned with the right partner and your missions are not on the same level, then you're finding yourselves in a situation where you're investing resources and energy into a project that may not succeed. So it's great that we have this interest, but it's also become a much more challenging environment to be able to manage. So we've basically tried to now reduce the number of new markets that we're doing and really try to focus on building out the ones that we have. So this summer, for example, we're only doing 3 new markets. We're doing 20 markets across the city, but we could have done probably 30.
Thank you, Marissa. So are there any folks out there who have questions? Is this a shy crowd? Oh, here we go.
Hi, I'm Becca Klein, formerly with the Center for Livable Future. I was just curious about all of your reflections from the work that you've been doing on sort of the space between or balance among local versus sustainable production versus just getting fresh and healthy to people. And, you know, in an ideal world, I'd love to see us supporting local and regional farmers that are using sustainable methods that get really healthy products to everybody who wants and needs to be eating them. But that's also very hard to do and not necessarily a reality. And I'd just be curious about your reflections on that.
Is that for everybody or? Yeah.
Well, I think that one of the things that I found in this movement is that sustainable, organic, local means different things to different people. And I think that until we kind of define what we mean by sustainable, we're all going to be swirling around in this pool and not speaking the same language. So that's my first comment to that. I think from what my experience, most of the family farms that come to our markets are growing sustainably. They are, you know, they're not using a huge amount of pesticides. They rotate their crops. They do, you know, all of the things that local farmers do to sustain their earth and to try, you know, try to grow fresh products that come to the market. So in that regard, they are growing sustainably. What it means to other people and what level of sustainability, you know, we try to define it as, I think that varies from whoever. It depends on who you talk to and what their goals are.
It's interesting thinking about this in terms of the supermarkets. I more recently, as of last week and the last few weeks, I've been on a trek across the state of Delaware on behalf of Secretary Key, our state Secretary of Agriculture, to understand the state of the state when it comes to food and farming. And I've never been on so many poultry farms. I've never talked to so many farmers in their kitchen with chicken cooking in the kitchen, which also I don't know, I can't quite get over that. But, and I can't tell you how many really, really care about the land. I mean, the land is their livelihood. And there's certainly a variety of practices out there, but I've had one tell me that, you know, farmers are the first environmentalists, and you know they definitely feel like they're on the attack in the Delmarva Peninsula, among other places. But I think we've got to get to a point where we're not having an adversarial relationship, where we're having more of a dialogue and somehow getting toward that understanding where production practices, you know, can be as ecologically friendly as possible, but yet have to sustain a growing global population with the kinds of equipment that's available. I think if there's one thing I've learned, it's that equipment drives a lot of what's grown, and the more advancement we can have in agricultural production, mechanization, it almost seems like that would actually promote more fruit and vegetable growing, because those of you who know growing may know that grain crops are, you know, largely completely mechanized. So you can just pick with your machinery, but once you get it to fruits and vegetables, you have to have labor, and that's a whole nother conversation.
So I agree that sustainable means different things to different people. I've worked with a group called School Food Focus, which is a nationwide organization, where we looked at trying to reduce the amount of processed food that we serve kids, and then speak with manufacturers about is the word I want to say, looking at how they put, oh God, I can't think straight. Anyway, we took chickens for one, and we wanted, so in defining what was sustainable, turned out to be we wanted a full-form chicken, not compressed or processed, that was grown in a cage that wasn't shot with antibiotics, and on and on and on. And what I can tell you with that is to try and get three food service directors from three different schools, districts to agree on what sustainable is like getting me to grow hair. Virtually impossible. But there is a lab up in the upper Midwest made up of about 15 school districts that are working around that. There are three of us in California that chose chicken fajita, drumsticks, and we were actually sourcing a drumstick and got a chance to visit a farm where they vertically own the process all the way through so that they could assure us that no antibiotics ever. The fact of the matter is it's cost prohibitive in many ways. Kids could care less as to whether their chicken was that way. So what we found is while there's an interest on the part of directors to do this, in a lot of cases it's cost prohibitive. But I think we're going to see where in society as a whole we're moving in that direction. Whole Foods and some of these other chain stores that were boutiques, you now go to Costco and any of your other large stores and they've got organic sections and what have you. So even today I've seen where what some might have thought initially was going to be a fad, there's a transformation taking place in our food system, and as the demand grows. But very good point. We stop gorging ourselves with so much food here, especially in America. We're not going to be able to produce food fast enough for a growing population. That's just merely a fact. So it's one thing to say we want tomatoes when we want them, not just when they're in season. We want them year-round, and we want them huge, and we want them perfect like in the store, and that's not the way food grows. And until we realize that, and until we're willing to go to the store and buy ugly fruit, we're going to end up with fruits that not necessarily the most healthy, that may be genetically modified, and people have their own views about that as well.
I really like the student-run grocery store. I thought it was really great. And maybe unintentionally, but I like the idea of the movie really being based on fruits and vegetables. And I was wondering with the panel, with just as Rodney Taylor just said, that production of food is going to be really pretty hard in the sense of the water use. And with meat being the greatest water use of all the foods, I was wondering if the panel could see a trend towards just a plant-based diet.
We promote eating fruits and vegetables at the markets, and our cooking demonstrations are all based around plant-based recipes. But I don't see myself promoting just a plant-based diet for anybody. I think choice is really what's important. So for those of us who want to become vegetarians, I think that's great. And for those of us who want to not do that, I think it's just as good. The issue, I think, for myself, I find myself becoming more vegetarian, not because I want to be a vegetarian, but because I don't trust the meat that is being sourced. So I think that's the issue. More so than whether you want to become a vegetarian or not, is how comfortable you feel with the sourcing of the meat that you're eating. I was just talking today, for example, my daughter loves salmon, but then I'm learning that salmon is not being fed corn. So do I want to eat that salmon? I don't know. So that's kind of the issue, is like, I think a lot of us are starting to really feel uncomfortable with the sourcing of the food that we're getting. And people, it becomes more, people become more aware of it. I think that's the challenge that you face, is trying to figure out, what do I really want to do?
Yeah, I actually think we're on the cusp of an aquaculture boom in this nation. I don't know. I would predict in like 10 years we'll be talking more about fish farming than we ever have before. Anyway, yeah. The vegetarian thing is interesting. I mean, USDA is about, or they just did release, I think, a food guide pyramid for vegetarianism. There's 3 new pyramids, if I'm not mistaken. I know someone in my office is working on an article on one, and yeah, I mean, the flip side is that I was at Purdue Factory in Delaware, and they produce 1.2 million pounds of processed chicken a day. And the majority is organic, and they're the world's largest producer of organic chicken. So it doesn't seem like it's slowing down. It sort of blows my mind.
So we're not trying to turn your children into vegetarians. The experts tell us that children are not consuming enough fresh fruits and vegetables. And so my goal and what I see happening in schools is we're teaching young children to come through the line and eat the colors. So when you go in a traditional school cafeteria, they go down a line with heavily processed foods, and they'll tell you they have a salad bar, which might be a food bar in the room somewhere that has various fruits and vegetables, canned, frozen, or otherwise, and no one really cares whether the kids go and get it. They just want to be able to say they have a salad bar because salad bars are cool, just like local food. But the fact of the matter is, what we should be concerned about is the obesity crisis still exists, and the proliferation of diabetes. We're talking about 2 out of 3 children. Those are my grandchildren you're talking about. And yet we let that bounce off of us and just go away. 2 out of 3. So we're trying to get kids to consume the colors, and as they go through the salad bar first, everyone goes through first, and that's patterned after the work of Dr. Brian Wenzink and Davis Just studies, that by placement of food, you can modify eating behaviors. So our goal is one and one only, to get the children to consume the colors. The more colorful, the healthier it is for them. And if we can get them to do that, then they have a chance of living a longer, more healthful life. And that's what we want for all of our children. Whether or not they become vegetarians, I have a son that's a vegan. I have another who's a carnivore like me. We just tear up meat.
I just want to add something. One of the things that we've learned, we've been doing cooking demonstrations at our markets, and we started doing them at supermarkets in the winter months. And one of the things that we learned and saw through that is that, our society has become so used to processed foods that our taste buds have disconnected from tasting real food. And so whenever we've done the recipes, they're all plant-based, and we try to do vegetables that people are not traditionally would try. So most people, you eat broccoli, you eat string beans, you eat corn, but you might not eat collard greens, or you might not eat turnip greens, or you might not eat beets, or you might not eat Brussels sprouts. You might not eat a lot of things that are good for you, it tastes good, but and inevitably, every time we prepare the recipe and we give it to somebody, their first reaction is like, they look at it and they're like, oh, I don't think I'm gonna like that. And then once they say, we tell them, you can taste it. You don't have to eat it. You can spit it out if you don't like it. And once they taste it, the reaction is like, oh my God, that tastes so good. I would have never thought that would, and we hear that. We said we should tape this because we hear that statement so many times. But I think that that's the experience that most people have, is that the connection of healthy food is it's not going to taste good. But once, because our taste buds are so used to like the salt, the sugar, all of the saturated crap that we have gotten used to eating, that once you try the vegetables, like they automatically become converted. And I think that's the experience that I'm sure you see with the kids. We see it with the kids when they come to the market as well. Our kids are not exposed to that at an early age. They've gotten so used to eating the stuff out of the box, out of the can, out of the bottle. And so once they try it, it's like, oh, this is a totally new experience. So I think that's, going back to the point about are we trying to become vegetarians? I don't think we're trying to become vegetarians. I think we're just trying to reconnect with eating whole foods.
I heard you getting at was sustainability by some measure in a much larger sense, because how water is used, whether it's growing fruits and vegetables, but certainly the large animals that are eaten, is approaching global concerns. You know, cows are, Amazon forests are being cut down so cattle can grow, and it's crazy things. And some level children need to get, you know, it may be in geography, maybe in other courses, a broader picture of what causes war, and some of it is water.
See if anyone wants to respond. Oh, no, I was just saying the Colorado River, we don't have to go that far to
Yeah.
talk about disputes over water and what it means for our food system.
In any movie, there's things that land on the cutting room floor, and there were a lot of stories told. I'm wondering if there's any stories that you wish had been able to be told in this movie that you can have a chance to tell us now.
It's a question for the filmmakers. Mike, do you have anything that we left out? No. All right. Well, I asked Mike to come up here in case anybody had any questions about the technical aspects of the filmmaking. So far the audience has let me down, but that's okay. I think there's probably, if I thought about, there's a lot of stories that would have been nice to tell. One of my favorite things is interviewing the high school students in Cody, because they had just so much to say and they were so enthusiastic. I think that, ultimately what I look at it as is a conversation starter. I mean, just telling some stories, at least giving people a flavor of what these folks are up to, is, a good way to just get this conversation going like we're having here right now. And I'd like to see that conversation or that process be multiplied a few hundred times in our wildest dreams, that it would just keep the conversation going in different places. And it's nice that we have people in different parts of the country who are in the film, because we hope that they'll be ambassadors for the film. That's part of our evil plan, is that they'll help us push it out, because our multi-million-dollar marketing plan, the money went missing. It's kind of like that Pentagon money that goes missing. We used to have a multi-million-dollar marketing budget, and I don't know what happened to it. But anyway, so I don't know if that answers your question, but I'll probably later think of a story that I wish I had a chance to tell, but that's what comes to mind right now. Other questions?
Yes, this is for Rodney. I have done in the past a little work with school-based programs, after-school programs, with school-based gardening and cooking demonstrations and recipes, and inviting family members in. And I wondered if you had any programs like that, or even what the woman was saying there. We tried to integrate gardening and food into different lessons in elementary curriculum, like math or science or geography. And do you have any experiences with that?
Okay. Yes. So I'm going to tell you that you can modify children's eating behaviors, that you can develop lifelong healthy eaters. It's not just through a salad bar. That's the vehicle that creates the excitement that gets parents' trust. I've got to change perceptions of what school food is in your mind. It's highly processed crap. And so the salad bar then, and I'm purchasing from the local farmers, so I'm putting money into the local economy, providing a market for that farmer, as Bob Knight told you, whose crop was sitting on the trees going to waste. Keep in mind, in America, we still waste 40% of the food that's grown. So we could, in fact, feed everyone if we weren't so hung up on that shiny apple that's the same size in the store that tastes like cardboard. That if we were willing to go to the farms, connect with the farmers, and connect with where our food source comes from and what food really looks like, then you can modify behaviors. But nutrition education is a huge part of that. And so whether we were partnering with Kaiser Hospital on Steps to Health, where we were teaching children to monitor what they eat and log their physical activity to see if it made any impact on their body mass index over a 13-week period, or in something like that, where we would bring the salad bar into a school with parents there, and the PE teachers would teach them to do family exercises while we provided the food and did the nutrition education. I could go on, where we connected with the 2-acre garden at a school, and the kids would harvest their strawberries and lettuce, and we would purchase them and bring an oversized check and go in the classroom and watch them do the math. So how do we connect the cafeteria with the classroom, with the community, and then start to transform? Or do dinner in the Grove, where farmers donated the food and our chef did the cooking, and the community came and bought it, and we got them to support our efforts. So I could go on about that. There's so much stuff on the floor that didn't make it into the movie. I could do a movie and do a couple of sequels over my 20s.
I actually thought of something else that I learned in the making of the film. You saw the citrus groves where workers were picking, and it was interesting because Bob Knight, the farmer, was explaining to me that this is not a migrant workforce, because the oranges get picked all year round. They have different varieties of oranges, so it's a 12-month season for them. So these are all a stable population. They all, don't have to move with the crops, basically. They're there in the same place all year round. Now, I don't know how you convert that over to other crops that aren't year round, but I found that very fascinating because you have all these assumptions that you make when you see, Hispanic men working in fields and doing very physical labor. He told me something about what they made, and when I did the math in my head, it sounded like they were making a pretty good living, which is not also something we associate with farm labor. So that was an interesting piece that I learned that we didn't really weave into the film. So, other questions? You have one? What's that? You said? Okay. If you have one more question, we'll take it. If not, we'll move on. All this talk about food. Hey, you got another one? Sure.
Foods and gourmet jams and different products, and it seems like that's growing and growing, and how that affects what you're trying to do.
Well, gentrification for me looks a lot different in New York City. Gentrification for me, so all of our markets are in low-income neighborhoods. Gentrification for us looks in the form of new buildings coming in, high-rises coming in for high-end tenants that are paying way above what most of the residents in the community can even begin to afford. And with that comes a total different level of customer base into the markets. And so what that means is that products that we traditionally didn't have, so for example, most of our markets, we have fruits and vegetables, possibly baked goods, but we don't have like dairy or cheeses or eggs or maple syrup or any of those high-end products, because our customer base can't afford it. Most of them are shopping with food stamps. And while you can purchase those items with food stamps, the price point, if you had to choose between that and vegetables or something else, you probably would leave that on the table. But now with gentrification, we're able to starting to diversify some of the products in the market because we have now a customer base that can support it. So yes, that's kind of how it's kind of playing out for us. So that's kind of what we are doing now, is trying to look at our markets and look at what the customer base is. We started adding credit cards and debit cards to our markets. We never needed credit cards and debit cards before because we just use SNAP. So those are the issues that we face now. So you're right.
Just along those lines, been asked just over the years to help different kinds of startups and low-income communities do like 5 things at once. They want to grow produce. They want to be an outlet for kids. You know that. You've been asked this too, huh? They want to be an outlet for kids and a nice space for the community to revitalize it. And they want to be an economic, they want to create jobs and revitalize the economy. And
That's a nonprofit model.
no, they also want to earn money. Yeah, anyway, I joke, but this is really, I mean, this question gets asked a lot. And the reality is that it's pretty clear that if you're going to sell food to low-income families in the neighborhood, you need a core staple of common product. You don't need expensive, fancy peppers. You just need regular food. And if you want to become an economic engine to sell and create a lot of jobs, then you can create a system that sells a lot of fancy peppers to wealthy people. But doing both in the same space is not going to happen overnight for sure. And if it does happen, it takes some kind of genius person to really make it all work with a lot of sweat. So it's interesting, the gentrification, because I can see how it can build over time, but it has to start as one thing or another.
And for us, I mean, I've been doing markets for over 20 years, and it's interesting to see, how the communities that we started out in have changed. So, like I said, to your point, we basically we went for just the basics: fruits and vegetables, maybe baked goods, and every market had that. However, now we're seeing each location has taken on a kind of its own entity depending on the level of gentrification. And actually, the farmers are very smart businessmen. So when people start coming and asking for certain products, you'll see that product show up on the table next season. And so really, that's how it's a process. It doesn't all happen, from one week to the next. It happens from season to season because the demand for the product is there, and then it'll show up in market. So. No, it doesn't, because I think that the core product is always fruits and vegetables. The other stuff is, what you're seeing more is more value-added products. So you'll see, more jams or pies or, but, those are selling like, a jar might be $10. My SNAP customer might not spend $10 on a jar of jam, but my other customers who've moved into the neighborhood probably would spend $10, on a jar of jam. So, demand drives the business pretty much.
Yeah, real quick. Go for it. Wait for a microphone. I'm sorry.
This is the fluff question, but I'm also curious.
See how tricky those things are?
About your favorite recipe using local foods. Yeah, your favorite recipe, or just food using local foods.
I like everything pretty much.
That's wonderful.
My favorite recipe, that's a tough one. I like collard greens. I love I love everything. So it's hard for me to tell you. Yes, let me see. What we've started doing, I can tell you what we've started doing. We have a series of recipes that we run throughout the season. And so we run them for like 2-3 years, and then we try to switch them out. And so last year we decided that we were going to switch the recipes out and really mix like vegetables that you would never think of mixing, like squash and cauliflower and like the bok choy and spinach. And so we started doing that, creating, and some of them we were like, we created them and we tried them. And then we also tried to add different flavors in terms of seasoning because we have a very diverse population. So we tried doing cumin and turmeric and, ginger and, like all these different eclectic types of herbs and spices. And we love them all, and people are like really amazed at the fact that they never even thought of making these combinations of vegetables to serve. So that's kind of that's what keeps me excited and motivated, because there's always something new to try and something new to create, as long as you're willing to be adventurous. So I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Well, as Rodney alluded to, we could talk about food all day, but at some point we need to eat some of it. So that time has come. There is a reception happening, and you're all invited, and it's over at what we call the Wall of Wonder, which is out the door here to the left and then a quick right. And you need this badge that you've probably got on your way in. If you don't have one, they're probably going pretty cheap on the street corner, maybe. I don't know. But either that or you can just talk us into it. But anyway, I hope we get to chat some more. Thank you to our guests.